Yes, I am the 2024 president of the Greensboro Regional Realtors Association. I will begin by introducing each of our four panel guests, provide a brief background, and each panelist will then discuss their session topic. If you don't mind, please place your questions in the chat and they will be addressed during the Q&A period. With me today is Sue Swartz, Jason Jordan, Sean O'Neill, and Mike Barr. Sue Swartz is the planning director of the City of Greensboro and current president-elect of the American Planning Association. Sue has been with the City of Greensboro since 1987 as Director of Planning, Director of Planning and Community Development, also Neighborhood Planning Manager, and Community Planner. Sue Swartz will kick off this session by providing an introduction to American Planning Association and answering the question, why the Accelerator Project? Sue? I think you're on
There we
mute.
go. There we go. Okay. 4 years into this, it's still a mystery. Good morning, everyone. I want to start by thanking Mike Barr and the Greensboro Regional Realtors Association for putting this webinar on. Mike and I have a Pennsylvania connection, and a few other connections, and I get an email like, "Do you know anything about this?" With the accelerator, with a copy of our accelerator. It is my honor. I've been active in APA for several years, and I begin as president. My term as president begins January 1st. To introduce this, I'm thrilled to introduce and carry the ball for this project forward. Housing hits everybody. You have kids trying to come back from college, find a place to live. Got seniors that are trying to downsize, but those houses are not found very easily because everybody wants the same 1,400 square foot layout, one story, that kind of thing. It's more than that, but it's more than that. And in our region, we are growing like gangbusters. This is the growth we've been planning for. For too many years, we were, a 1 to 2% growth city, maybe if we were lucky. And now with Toyota and Boom Supersonic and Marshall Aerospace and countless others, and I can't believe I could say that, there are literally thousands of jobs coming to our area, changing the economic dynamics. That brings people, additional people. And we were kind of in a bit of a housing crunch before that. So, and it's not just Greensboro, it's our region. We are growing up and down a corridor that is, again, unprecedented. So we have to have unprecedented ways of doing business and changing how we think, how we approach some of the public perception about who lives in what type of housing. So I am pleased that the American Planning Association, this is before I got on the scene, started this partnership, and my colleagues Jason and Sean are going to talk a little bit more about that partnership, how it came about, and some of the ideas that came out of a 2-year collaboration of how do we not just point out the problem, but what are some practical solutions, ideas to explore regionally, locally. Sean will give us what Delaware's been doing, took the bull by the horns and already started to apply some things. So thrilled again, Mike, thank you for this partnership. This is amazing. It's what we'd hoped for, and it really, coming from the private sector, coming from the industry, is just thrilling to moving, and I think critical to moving the ball forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Jason Jordan, who is the policy. I went multiple different ways of how I've just known Jason for 25 years. So he's a dad. He was in Greensboro. His daughter danced in the Nutcracker at Tanger Center. So he loves our downtown and loves our region. So yay us. Lives in DC, has been with APA for 25 plus years, and has been their direct policy manager and runs his own consulting company, Advocacy Associates, and has been the lead on this project. So Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you. And they don't want to hear me talk about what's going on in Greensboro. What is this accelerator thing, and how can we, and how can we move it forward?
Thank you so much, Sue. Thanks to the Greensboro Realtors Association. I'm really delighted to be here. Just before the session, Mike and I were chatting that I had an opportunity to talk about this project at the National Association of Realtors Conference in Boston, and it's just been amazing, the power of the collaboration. So happy to be with you. I'm going to share a few slides to kind of walk you through what the accelerator has been, and how we think it can be valuable in terms of the work that you want to do in your own region. Um, as Sue said, this project has long roots. We have been involved in putting this project together for the better part of 2 years. In recent months, we've actually been able to move from a period of discussion and discovery and convening to actually producing some recommendations. So that's really what I want to focus on today in terms of kind of where we've been and what it means for your work. Um, the campaign itself originated in a collaboration that was the American Planning Association and the National League of Cities. So representing the public side of this equation, right? Like local elected officials and the professionals who have the expertise to craft the policy coming together. But we quickly recognized that real solutions were not going to be limited to the public sector space. But that's where this started. Um, and the foundational ideas here is that we really wanted to focus on locally led, regionally led solutions. We do believe that there's an appropriate role for the state, there's an appropriate role for the federal government in helping solve the housing crisis. But we wanted to focus on trying to uncover ideas that communities could act on right now with the authority they already have, with the resources already in place. Really an effort to kind of generate good thinking, proven solutions, and the political will to move them forward. We were, I think, humble enough to recognize that we didn't know the full shape of the problem. And so we spent time going around the country, looking at housing projects, talking to people from across the sort of spectrum of industries that are involved in housing to really try to discover what's working, what's happening, what are the obstacles, what are the perceptions. It's amazing the degree of experimentation, innovation, and action that's actually happening because the crisis is so significant. The other thing that I was really struck by is that while we tend to think about the housing crisis as, you know, it's a California phenomenon or it's a Northeastern phenomenon of high growth, big city, major metro markets, the reality is this challenge is spreading everywhere. We were part of a research partnership with a coalition called Up for Growth that identified the fact that this challenge of housing supply and availability is actually most acute in smaller states and growing, you know, micro regions as opposed to just being a kind of major metro phenomenon. The last thing that was a kind of foundational pillar of the work was this idea that we needed partners in order to make this work, not just partners to drive the ideas, you know, politically, but also partners to really fully understand the scope of the problem and the nature of the solution. So we assembled what we believe to be a fairly unusual group of partners. So in addition to APA and the National League of Cities, we wanted to bring in what we thought of as the pipeline of housing supply professionals, right? The National Association of Home Builders, the Mortgage Bankers Association, and the National Association of Realtors. Because while planners and elected officials can control the policy and the politics at the local level of housing, we still need those professionals who are going to build it, finance it, and sell it. The thing that's unusual about this is these organizations have not always been in lockstep agreement on public policy solutions as it relates to housing. And we recognize that and sort of owned that from the beginning and really committed to sharing our perspectives in the hope of coming to a place where we could have common ground on individual actions that we could all support. And I think that gives everybody a degree of comfort that the ideas that are in the playbook have been discussed and vetted by folks who represent all of these unique perspectives. And I will say, having participated in this, it was really fascinating the degree to which, in many instances, there was simply a lack of awareness of what the needs and obstacles were from the point of view of these other professional interests involved in the process of generating housing supply. So the partnership is, in a way, in my view, the secret sauce of this entire initiative by bringing all of these diverse perspectives together. Um, the other thing that was critical to this project was defining how we were different. There are a lot of organizations that are concerned about the housing crisis. They're concerned about how we, better house our communities. So there's no shortage of reports out there talking about challenges of affordability or accessibility in housing. So what were we going to contribute that was different? Well, one was the idea that we wanted to focus on local solutions. Secondly, we wanted to focus specifically on housing supply, right? So we all know that there's a role and an importance for what might be considered the demand side of the equation in terms of subsidies, whether those subsidies go to homeowners or to developers or renters. Um, that's an important part of this. We wanted to set that aside for a second and focus on what can we do to actually increase the overall inventory of housing and do that across the spectrum. So not just focus on one income level or one type of housing, but on housing supply overall. We assembled a steering committee of 10 planners and 10 mayors from across the country to guide and inform our work in conjunction with the partners that I mentioned on the previous slide. And we decided as a group to focus our definition of housing supply around these three concepts. The housing supply needs to be diverse. And by diverse in this instance, we mean different types of housing available to different people with different needs. Secondly, it needs to be attainable, not just affordable, although that's part of the equation here, but attainable whether you're talking about workforce housing, where you're talking about middle income housing, or whether you're talking about full market rate housing. Thirdly, it needs to be equitable. We recognize that there is a legacy of the kinds of codes and regulatory systems that have been in place that have shut a lot of people out of the housing market for a long time. And so any solutions for housing supply need to take into account the issue of creating an equitable pipeline. Our product, and really what I'm here, to talk about today and share with you, is a product that we released called the Housing Supply Accelerator Playbook. You can use the QR code there. Happy to send around links as well. It's a digital product, and it focuses on articulating ideas, right? Specific strategies, specific approaches, and highlights case studies to show how those things have been successful in other communities. It's not intended necessarily to be read from page 1 to page 100. It's intended to sort of be a self-directed, pathway to help solve the unique circumstances that you might face. So you will find in there big city solutions, regional scaled solutions, smaller community solutions. That's very intentional. This was not written to be exclusive to one kind of area or one facet of the problem. So this is also the result of a lot of collaborative effort, right? Because we had to talk about these ideas and make sure that the kinds of ideas and solutions that are recommended in here, kind of pass muster with all of the different partner organizations. So we feel confident that the ideas here have a basis of support no matter which piece of the housing industry you approach. The way you sort of navigate the playbook itself is in these four categories, and I'll talk just a minute about kind of core concepts and ideas in each of the four. But the four pillars here are collaboration and partnership, construction and development finance, and then the land use zoning and regulatory structures. For each one of these areas, you'll see a set of recommended strategies with a menu of options for how those strategies might look in your community, some helpful tips based on what we learned from those convenings, and then case studies, as I mentioned, so that you can look at how they have functioned in practice in different places around the country. We chose the metaphor of a playbook very intentionally, right? Because sometimes you need the big play, the Hail Mary, and sometimes you just need to get a couple of yards to get a first down. And we needed a set of ideas that would meet you wherever you were in trying to, tackle this problem. So you'll see stuff scaled quite differently within each one of the topics in terms of, what are you actually trying to accomplish so that people can, use this immediately to begin to make progress. Before talking about some of those solutions, though, I think it's important to highlight one of the philosophical premises of the entire project, which is that housing is actually a system. So when we think about solutions, we need to think about all of the different ways the system works together. What you can see on the graphic here is a notion about how we begin to think about reform and policy changes that all work together in a loop, in a cycle that starts with a planning process. And I know that's probably not a shock coming from the American Planning Association, but really using the planning process itself to create that vision, and then moving to a process where you're beginning to align all of your regulatory systems to actually achieve the vision that we have in place. Right now, too often, there's misalignment there. And so then we've created other systems to kind of get around that misalignment. So, this system focuses on the plan, that alignment, and then taking other steps to begin speeding the process forward, to promote the kinds of housing that's called for in the plan, to work on eliminating some of the bureaucratic barriers that can sometimes, and financial barriers that can impede progress, and then building in both measurement and accountability, cycling back to, ultimately informing a fresh plan. Um, so quickly, collaboration and partnership. I personally think, and I know Sean's going to talk about his experience in Delaware, that one of the most important outcomes of this project is less about any individual policy change that can be made and more about the idea of working together to identify solutions, period, full stop, right? So the kind of conversation that you're convening here and the kind of work that Sean has done in Delaware is an example of what we were hoping to achieve with this partnership overall. People kept coming back to this idea that in a way the conversation itself was as important or more important than any of the individual outcomes, because understanding the problem, understanding different perspectives opens up the door to the kind of collaboration that leads to policy action. So the playbook talks very specifically about how we put together a core group of partners, a set of advisory partners, created opportunities to analyze the situation, to do a process of discovery, and then move toward an agreed upon set of recommendations and products that would come out of this to inform policymakers. And we think there's a model there that's adaptable for other local, state, or regional circumstances. The kinds of ideas you will find in the construction and development section. A lot of focus on reforming the permitting process, speeding and streamlining that process to move certain projects faster, and what local government can do to support that with things like pre-approved plans, pattern books, guardrails, and predictability. That issue of the development community needing to understand exactly what the local communities want so that they can not operate in a zone of uncertainty was a theme. And so we tried to identify some specific approaches there. Secondly, they talked about a lot about the idea of needing political leadership to be the convening force to help deal with some of the challenges about what communities want or think they want in terms of the product. Thirdly, there are real challenges in the construction trades and workforce, and there's some roles for industry and for government to play in supporting both the emergence of smaller scale developers who might be developing a business model that's more focused on smaller projects, missing middle kinds of projects, but also bringing a new generation of folks into the trades. And then lastly, this issue of building codes and new technologies. There's been a rapid advancement in things like modular and offsite housing construction that have outpaced many of the existing rules for how we allow construction and what we promote in terms of our code. So there's a series of strategies and recommendations to focus in each of those four categories. On the finance side, we tried to identify what some of the state and federal finance tools are and how communities can more effectively leverage them, whether that's a grant, whether it's other kinds of finance products, or even just engagement. Secondly, there was a very rich conversation around understanding and shifting some of the kind of hidden rules that often lie in things like appraisals and underwriting and other lending standards that can sometimes work in opposition to the sort of zoning and land use reforms that we're seeing being made, and sort of the need for alignment, not just between the plan and the rules, but between the rules and the financing. So there's some strategies there, and that's an ongoing area of work because it's sort of difficult to uncover at times whether those standards are driven by things like federal regulation or whether they're driven by models and practice inside the industry. So continuing to work with them on that. And this was an area where we really found that on the public sector side, the knowledge was the thinnest. And so part of what we're committed to as an ongoing element of the accelerator is training and education to begin bringing the finance community and the government community closer together. This area is the one that's nearest and dearest to my heart. It's our main focus at APA. It's really taking a look at how do we reform the systems, remove barriers, and what I think of as re-legalizing options that we had in our toolbox 50 years ago that have often been stripped out and changed over time. How can we create new regulatory systems that continue to protect quality of community, but also allow for greater diversity of needs that we face? So I mentioned the whole issue of trying to align our regulatory systems with plans. We also talk a lot in the playbook about how do we accurately assess housing needs to drive our planning process and leverage new technology tools that allow us to model different potential changes in our regulatory systems to better understand what the economic and social impact of those changes might be. Overall, I think it's fair to say that we're urging communities to simplify and consolidate their systems. Over time, lots of different, zoning districts, overlay districts, all of the sort of puzzle pieces of the current system create sometimes hidden barriers, even when they're very smartly designed and well intentioned. And so trying to reduce that complexity so that the system is easier to navigate, and there are other points in the process to make the appropriate choices about what kind of housing needs to go where. The core of all this is expanding options in general, whether we're talking about accessory dwelling units or whether we're talking about low density multifamily development, reducing parking minimums. All of these things are conversations where we try to demonstrate what communities are doing in these spaces to generate more housing opportunity locally. And then lastly, looking to improve the process. It's a funny system we've engineered for the last 50 years where we tend to plan for what we want and then regulate for what we don't, and then create backdoor systems to argue about it all in the political realm, right? So variances and zoning appeals and all of this, those are important. But what we need to do, and one of the sort of insights of this project was what can we do to depoliticize this and to have those discussions and arguments about, at the right stage in the process, so that when we get to the actual development process to get the inventory that realtors need in order to thrive, that we're not sort of beholden to an overly politicized process that tends to grind to a halt project by project. So that's the playbook. I'm more than happy to talk more specifically in the Q&A section about some of the work that's actually form the substance of the report. But we're excited to put this out in the world and to support communities like the Greensboro region as you're tackling the manifestation of the housing crisis in your area. And with that, I guess I'll kick it back to you, Sue.
Yeah, Barbette, are you doing our next introduction?
I certainly will. Thank you so much, Jason, for all of that information. Very informative. Next up, I think he queued you up, Sean. We have Sean O'Neill. Sean O'Neill joined the University of Delaware Institute for Public Administration in May of 2017. Sean's role, which includes working on applied research projects with state agencies such as the Delaware Department of Transportation and the Office of State Planning Coordination, direct project work on comprehensive plans and related projects with communities from the city of Wilmington to Sussex County, and managing Institute Public Administration's local government leaders training program. You're quite busy, Sean. Prior to joining the Institute of Public Administration, Sean was a senior planner with the Chester County, Pennsylvania Planning Commission, where he was responsible for coordinating housing and emergency management related efforts, in addition to working directly with municipalities through the county's Vision Partnership Program. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Government and Policies and a Master's degree in Community Planning from the University of Maryland. Sean, will you provide us with a local response from Delaware?
Sure, absolutely, and thank you. Thanks, Sue and Mike and Marvette for the invite. I'm happy to be here. Hopefully, everyone from North Carolina doesn't hold my Maryland degrees against me. But I know we're not in the ACC anymore, but some of that still carries over, I think, right? So just checking. There you go. So yeah, thanks for having us. I also want to recognize Josh Thomas, who is our past president of APA Delaware. He's on the call right now, I think, too. He kind of led this effort as our advocacy chair. I'm the current president of APA Delaware, which our terms are 2 years, and mine's coming up actually now, so we'll have a new president soon. But I guess this kind of started 2 falls ago. I guess last September, I went to DC for APA's fly-in event, and we sat in on one of the meetings for the National Housing Supply Accelerator. And I came away from it thinking like, wow, this is amazing, because, I have a background in real estate as well as planning, and could kind of see what's happening with this housing crisis and what a big problem it is everywhere. And it was great that APA is stepping up and doing something. But I came away thinking, how is this going to be effective if you don't do it at a more localized level? Because as we all know, every community is different when it comes to these things, but especially every state's different. You have different state law, you have different precedents. So, I went back and talked to a couple of people at our chapter and said, do you think we could do something, little, like just with our chapter, talking to some people, trying to identify some specific areas where we could identify opportunities to increase housing supply just in Delaware. And, I've kind of thought for a long time that one of the advantages we have being such a small state, Delaware, is that, we should be able to do some of these things a little more effectively. So, decided to put my money where my mouth was, and we decided to try to go ahead and do it. And we ended up, coming up with our report, which is on our website. If you Google APA Delaware, and you find our website, the full report is linked at the top of our page. So after a couple of months of kind of going back and forth, we were trying to figure out who to partner with. We decided to partner with the City Managers Association of Delaware, because I know our League of Local Governments, which is the National League of Cities affiliate, very well. I go to their meetings all the time. And I just felt like we were going to get better feedback from city managers in Delaware. Delaware is a very small state, 3 counties, but we have 57 municipalities. So we have a lot of small towns. And, it just felt to me like we were going to get better feedback from that group for our specific effort. And I mentioned to Sue, in a previous email, like in North Carolina, it might be the counties that you'd want to engage with, maybe even more than city managers, but that's something that could be different state to state. So we were really happy that city managers were actually very excited and eager to work with us. They met quarterly, so we were able to meet with them in March of this year, and they, kind of unanimously immediately approved it. And we had our first meeting in April. And just going to go over real quick. And this is all in our report, which isn't very long. It's like 12 pages. And all we do is outline what we did, and then, kind of a summary of some of our findings. So, and I'll just read from the report. In April 2024, APA Delaware and CMAD, City Managers Association of Delaware, started the Housing Supply Accelerator effort by holding our first group meeting. The purpose of the group is to use the National Housing Supply Accelerator effort, as well as the playbook, as an example to identify and promote the most efficient and effective housing solutions that would likely be successful in Delaware. Our view is that housing is primarily a local land use issue, and as a result, housing solutions are almost never easy to outline appropriately without state and local context. We hope that our discussions and recommendations lead to concrete action steps at both the local and statewide level in order for Delaware to begin effectively addressing its housing production challenges, both now and in the near future. So, again, like aligned with what Jason was saying, we could kind of see what's coming down the line a little bit at the state level. There are, kind of more and more, there's more and more interest, more and more efforts for states to override local authority on this issue because it's become such a crisis. We, while that in some cases that might be, okay or acceptable, we wanted to try to see, what can we find that doesn't require that, just to offer our own insight and guidance to state officials. We have a new governor coming in this fall. We knew that was going to happen, so our deadline internally kind of was around this time, November, so that we could have something to give the governor's transition team, which is, meeting right now, when they come in. Now, in the meantime, and this is not in the report, but it's important for context, the state actually moved forward pretty aggressively with housing, a little bit after we had started this. So we had state senator introduce 7 housing bills, which we haven't had a housing bill introduced to Delaware in ages, probably decades. So he introduced 7. A few of them got passed. One of them that got passed established a housing supply task force, which is this big, state effort. So effectively what ended up happening, at least in my view, is that our report ended up being a little bit of a guide or a helpful set of recommendations for that task force. So I think that task force is going to, we're not the only group that they're looking at, but they will look at our report and, they may or may not come up with some of the recommendations we came up with, but, our goal was always just to offer what expertise we have as planners and city managers, to try to improve the situation in Delaware. We're a state that we don't have a very large city. Wilmington's our largest city. It's about 75,000 people. So not very big. And, the state has developed in a very kind of suburban sprawl way. And we recognize that, and it's been recognized, but, nothing really has effectively been done about it. So we're hoping that some of our recommendations can help to make those changes. And, I'll skip right here to the recommendations, but I'll say, essentially what we did in our process is after meeting in April, we met with the state senator I mentioned, Russ Huxtable, who fortunately was reelected because he had an election up this fall. We met with him and his staff in May because the legislative session ended in June, so we wanted to make sure that we could get ahead and meet with him before that. And then in June, we actually met with the Realtors Association and Association of Home Builders in Delaware, and we were very happy and surprised at how well things aligned. That the things that we were looking to do, they were almost across the board supportive of. And then in July, we met with our state housing authority, which in Delaware, it's a little weird and unique. It's both a housing finance agency and our state housing department, essentially. So they handle a lot. So we met with them. And then I thought maybe the best meeting we had was in August, which was our last larger meeting. And we met with the three planning directors from each of the three counties and the community development directors from each of the three counties. And that was great because, we kind of accidentally discovered that they never meet. Delaware is such a small state. The counties hardly ever meet with each other, and politics are different in our northernmost county where 95 goes through Newcastle County than it is with Sussex County, which is southern near the beaches, tends to be a lot more conservative. So that was great just in terms of getting them to talk to each other, but they all, had similar things. And so that was great discussion. After that, we met with the executive director of the League of Local Governments and the executive director of our state's largest housing advocacy organization, Housing Alliance Delaware. Those meetings were a little bit shorter. We were just telling them kind of our discussions, what we had in mind, and they gave us a little bit of feedback, but generally we're very supportive, across the board with all the groups we met with. We really did not have a lot of disagreement in things that we were talking about. Different things came up, but people were pretty aligned with what we thought we could do, what we wanted to do. And so after all that, we had to come up with recommendations. And again, I got to give Josh Thomas really all the credit for this. He kind of set up this interesting matrix where we were able to kind of break it down to state and local and enable and incentivize. So if you want to think about it, like we have here in parentheses, enabling would be kind of remove barriers, kind of deregulating in some cases. And then incentivizing would be about, increasing opportunities. And those are places where, we can kind of just change the dynamic and offer some additional incentives to get the results that we're looking for. So, as you can see here, and all these recommendations, these were not things that we came up with. These were things that came up in our discussions. And we tried to really highlight things that came up repeatedly in multiple discussions with the groups that we met with. In that sense, it was not that hard. It was very difficult to narrow down and summarize all the notes we had from all the meetings, but the common themes and kind of specific examples were kind of less difficult to identify. I mean, they kind of jumped out. So as you can see at the state level, we and this was something we heard in a couple different conversations, coordinating with comprehensive plans updates and this is kind of, it's a little bit of an aggressive one. Some of these are, but again, they came up multiple times. So we were trying to be true to the process. And so we're recommending to require all local jurisdictions to evaluate and update their zoning codes within the next 10 years. And then reevaluate the zoning codes 10 years thereafter. And the reason that came up is because with all these recommendations, both in Delaware, but also many of the things nationally, ultimately, you'll need to update zoning. So we felt, well, if the state within reason requires some zoning update, over some period of time, then that sort of gives them the opportunity or forces them to look at these things more closely. If they're required to update their zoning, then it also gives you an opportunity to make some significant changes. So, that's something that we thought could be really helpful. And then we also wanted to prohibit public hearings. This was something that I know was controversial with NLC and other groups in the national effort. And people kind of pushed back a little bit on this with us too. So we changed the wording a little, but we really felt like for certain projects that, and again, we weren't being over prescriptive. We said meet certain density and affordability criteria. The state and local governments, they can figure that out. They can figure out what exactly that means. But we felt like for certain types of projects that meet those criteria that are in state strategy level 1 and 2 areas, which are the densest areas in the state, and state strategies is something that the Office of State Planning does once every five years, and then 10 years they do a full update, and sort of outlines different density areas throughout the state, primarily for the purpose of where the state is going to invest their money, on kind of smart growth principles. But we really felt like it could be used more effectively in this effort to, identify places where we want growth, the denser areas that are level 1 and 2. It's much more effective, both long-term from an economic perspective in terms of providing services and infrastructure, but also, through transit, access to, local food and other health resources. It's just sort of basic smart growth principles there in terms of focusing on those areas. In terms of incentivizing, we really felt like the state can do a lot more here. And you can see, kind of our recommendations there. Create more incentives to promote infill development in those level 1 and 2 areas, like I mentioned. Creating, a statewide accelerator program for residential projects that meet those certain criteria. Looking at state and local transfer taxes, and then providing additional incentives within DelDOT. So, again, one of the things that was a common theme was, DelDOT, like Department of Transportation, kind of being a barrier to growth and some of the new development that we were hoping to see. So, kind of moving on, some of these are still, I think, state. No, this is all local. Sorry about that. So there's kind of more for the local side in terms of removing barriers. We had that update zoning code, reduce minimum lot sizes, and we pulled a number of these from the Housing Supply Accelerator, but they also came up in our conversations. So things that came up in our conversations that kind of neatly aligned with things that were in the accelerator, we tried to identify those things. And there were some of them, but not all of them, obviously. And so you can kind of go through, see the rest of the recommendations. We touch on ADUs, adopting or increasing vacant building fees. So, I don't think any of these things are necessarily earth-shattering, but, they're things that we think are not necessarily the most complicated to do. Some of them might be somewhat controversial, but we feel like if you were to go through and, even just pick some of these things, maybe half of them, and you were to implement them, it would have a really big impact on housing supply in the state. And these are things, again, that some of which could apply to a lot of other places. And that was something I think we were surprised about it, how many of the recommendations in the playbook actually did apply pretty easily, to our state and local areas. But, it was a combination of that, and then looking at, things that would be more effective specifically in Delaware. So, so that's what we came up with. And stop sharing my screen here.
So Sean, Peter, the host of the Zoom host, I sent him by email the document, so he will send it out to the folks who registered for the conference. This is a smaller document, and we've got the website for the APA one. So thank you for sharing that. So
Sure,
wow, it's so great minds. Mike and I were talking about this opportunity, and then LinkedIn, Sean pops in this little notice about, hey, look what we did in Delaware. And I was like, okay, we're talking region. Granted, I think even our region's slightly bigger than the state of Delaware, just saying.
Yeah.
Go Blue Hens.
Yeah,
Let me just put that out
you can
there.
think of us as it's like a big county. That's what I tell people, because we're about 1 million people. So
But if you can, well, that's pretty much our region, but you can, I mean,
Yeah.
so looking at what you still have multiple jurisdictions you have to overcome. There's, political philosophies that are different and other things. So hopefully people got a few tips from your things. Mike, you want to jump in there? I know you do. I see
Well,
that
I
mic up.
just you talk about starters. So you did it on the staff side of a municipality or of the state, or um, and starting in we got the 421 corridor, 21 counties, trying to get all those regions to start a HSA. Ideas on that first start. You got to go tackle your planning director and say, hey.
Hey.
No, you're already here, Sue. But you know, we really like to start discussing or moving this forward. This whole concept. I'm assuming most of the planning directors across the state have already maybe heard about the HSA or no. Anyway,
Well,
it's to get
I put
started. How do you get started in moving the ball down the?
I'm gonna jump a little, and then ask my colleagues to hop in, because I think given the culture of our region, I think the fact that, and this is why I so enthusiastically embraced Mike when you contacted me, I think being industry led has a higher, I'm watching how I say this. The collaboration is going to be that the tendency for collaboration is going to be a little bit stronger. Not that we don't collaborate at the government level, but if I do it, I mean, look at the 421 corridor plan. What's Greensboro telling us what to do? All we were trying to do is figure out where our water and sewer was going to go, and you know, there was this backlash. So, but I'm going to leave it. I think a collaboration of the private sector with, and then pulling in government and nonprofit entities is going to be a master for our region what to do. That's my thought. I'm willing to be wrong, but I turn over to Jason and Sean and your thoughts.
Well, Sean's got the real world experience, but I'll tell you what we did at the national level is that we sat back and we figured out like who the core folks needed to be. You know, what were those interests, and they may look a little different. You know, Sean chose the city managers as opposed to the state municipal league. You know, there may be regional economic development organizations or other groups that might represent different facets of industry. Um, I think you begin by identifying who are the right core partners. Now, that doesn't mean they're the only partners, right? Because what we immediately did was after we defined the 5 core, we went out and those 5 created a list of probably 25 groups that needed to have a say in the process because they had specialized expertise or recognized political leadership. And that's kind of how we built it, right? So it's for us, it started with who are the folks that are the drivers in the pipeline and where are they, you know, in terms of national organization. So I think it looks different when you think about that at a state level or at the regional scale, but I'll let Sean chime in.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, the whole purpose of doing this locally is to identify the people that make the most sense at your local level, right? So, um, you know, I don't know the dynamics of your region exactly, but you know, you might want to reach out to you know, executive director if you have like a regional organization, you know, maybe they're a partner. Um, maybe the state APA, you know, partner is a partner. But I think, you know, you identify a couple core partners and then go, like Jason was saying, go meet with everybody else that you think is kind of a primary or very significant you know, entity in the area that's gonna understand the issue of increasing housing supply in depth. At least that's the way we kind of approached it. Um, we you know, we're very open about the fact that we did not meet with every single group that we could possibly meet with that would have made sense or that would touch this. You know, you know, we didn't meet with the fire marshals. We didn't meet with the executive committee for the League of Local Governments. Part of that was because timing. We were trying to get this done by November, but you know, I think we met with the core groups that we felt we really need to meet with. We partnered with city managers, and then we met with, you know, in our state anyway, there was really only one legislator that was, you know, introducing a lot of housing legislation significantly. He was kind of the go-to person, so we met with him. So we, you know, kind of checked the box with the legislature, home builders, realtors, state housing authority, and then the 3 counties. And you know, we felt like we covered enough there that we were hitting on a lot of the more important areas, and we were meeting with people that really, you know, kind of knew these issues in depth. Because ultimately the idea is to get a set of recommendations that people can kind of rally around and agree with, that are also going to be very effective. So, you know, again, like without knowing your region, in detail. It might be, it's a little bit difficult to say exactly, but, maybe it's APA, North Carolina, City of Greensboro, the county. If there's a regional economic development group, maybe they'd be appropriate. But certainly it's great that realtors are on board from the start, because at the very least, your APA region and the realtors, could kind of take this on and move forward. But I'm sure that there's a core group that you can get together and kind of just move forward. But part of getting started, and this is a little bit different than what planners like to do a lot of the time, but part of our thing was like, we're just going to do something. Like we're going to offer our expertise, and we're going to do the best job we can. We're not going to worry about it being absolutely perfect, because we know that at the very least, from our perspective as planners, and it would be the same thing from your perspectives as planners and realtors, that you have a lot of knowledge and expertise to offer on this topic. And frankly, we just saw so many people spinning their wheels on it. We wanted to be able to offer something to the conversation, because people are really desperately trying to find solutions to the crisis we're in. So
if I could just jump back in to build on what Sean is saying, I think one of the lessons we learned from the beginning was, exactly what you're saying. We decided not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? We wanted to make even a small contribution would be an important contribution. The other thing we tried really hard to avoid is something that sometimes I think a lot of the organizations involved in this challenge struggle with, which is, defining what the scope isn't, right? You can't solve every public policy problem in one process. So just recognizing from the outset that, yes, supportive infrastructure is a problem in housing. Yes, social services are a big issue. We can't fix all of that in one go. And I think when people sort of acknowledge that we've defined the universe of what we're trying to focus on here, it becomes easier to say, yes, that's important. We're going to put that over here and acknowledge it, but we're not going to, end up in a situation where we can't come to consensus because we've just added every issue on top of, the one specific thing, which is why really starting from the premise of housing supply and accelerating housing supply was a crystallizing moment, I think, because it differentiated us from other housing conversations that were happening.
And I think that if I can just observing how the Angela, my now soon to be predecessor, she's been welcome, and she's been talking to the mortgage bankers at their conference. She's been invited to talk to the places planners don't usually get asked to come and talk and tell us about this. It's interesting that the pieces that link together are talking anyway, because they see it. And I think there's, so for example, I know there's a, hey, let's get that water and sewer thing going. We got to get water and sewer. Well, if you just focus on the water and sewer thing, you're going to have sprawl, not just a little, a lot. We've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, called the most sprawliest county and sprawliest county, whatever. And so here's a chance. We have this chance and this incredible moment of growth to really do something different and special and long lasting and productive. And that's, it's not just putting sticks and bricks, it's about creating communities. And yes, so we're having all these people together, having those conversations. It's not, hey, we're going to get, so many units per year up. We have to, that's a given, but how we do it. So Mike, I know you're chomping, so I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah. Well,
I can
say,
see you.
the housing supply accelerator. I can imagine private industry coming out, meaning the builders, realtors, Trevik, other organizations coming out with a housing HSA concept, and all the NIMBYs in our town coming at us, and then there goes city council back into the corner, and we're not in the housing. We're not developers. The developers develop, and in the county. So, Sean, it seems like you just bulldozed. You just went ahead and put something down laid something down and made people react to it, or getting people to react to it, versus worrying about public fodder, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is right or wrong, but my perspective as a planner is that, ultimately we're not the decision makers. The elected officials are the decision makers. What we can do is offer our expertise on the issue. And then, the political realities of it are not always ours. Obviously, if you work for local government, you work for a county or political entity, you have to respond to the elected leaders. But, like a little bit of it is understanding the structure of government and how this is supposed to work. We're experts on this topic, city managers and planners, and that's all we're saying. And we're offering, if you would like to increase housing supply, which we think we should, and I think most people are kind of getting around that idea, here are some good ways to do it that don't require the state to override local authority.
Yep.
And that's somewhere where I think you come at it a little bit different, where local leaders, theoretically at least, can understand, at some point we're going to have to meet in the middle. If you have pressure from the state trying to come in and override your authority, well, maybe here are some options of things we can do so that that doesn't happen. The NIMBY, issue is it's always going to be there, but I think, many of us recognize the issues in the market and the housing crisis. And I think there's, to Sue's point, this is a great opportunity to take advantage of in terms of, somewhat educating the public in terms of why you want to grow in a certain way, not just because it's the right thing to do environmentally and create good neighborhoods and all that, but it's costly to develop in a sprawling way. And ultimately, it costs the state and region and counties a lot of money to grow in that way. And so we're creating a problem in terms of housing price and housing choice that we don't really need to. I mean, we can change the zoning and allow the market to work. So some of it, I think, is just trying to change the dynamic, change the conversation a little bit. And I think that's where some people are kind of struggling to get their arms around the issue. But there's a lot kind of going on here, not to get too academic, but like, if you look at our metro areas where most of the growth grows, we've sprawled out. There's not as much open, undeveloped land anymore, in most developed areas. So that means you have to do more redevelopment. That means more density. People don't like density. We get that. But at some point, we got to do something. We have to allow the market to work the way it wants to work. Zoning was never meant to be this rigid and inflexible, when it was created. It's just kind of become that over time. And I think that's kind of where we've been coming from it. And I think, if you get some, state, probably statewide political leaders, not local political leaders, the business community, realtors, home builders, economic development, and planners, you have a pretty good group there that can try to combat the NIMBY, aspect, which is always going to be there. I mean, that's going to be a barrier. We know that it's not an easy thing to fight against. Local politicians don't like it. But that's why we are where we are. And so, somebody's got to step up and try to change the conversation. So that's what we were just trying to do our part as a professional organization, ultimately, trying to offer solutions that we think, would get to the right place.
Well,
I think the timing is couldn't be better. I mean, even with the shifts in Raleigh and in Washington, I will say though, this year's congressional fly-in, we are primarily represented by one party. I met with them about the accelerator, about different things in Washington that can change bipartisan bills, and even got bipartisan support for the pro-housing grant that we submitted. I mean, I've never had, and follow-up, not just a little, like enthusiastic follow-up. How can we help you? How can we make this better? And we're seeing some of that coming out of Raleigh. So I think we have this, we can take this moment in time and say, whoa, cool, there's a moment in time, and then wonder why it's gone, or we can do something. And I think Mike, just going, hey, let's get this. And he was, I'm going to let everybody know, compliment. Mike is very pushy. He said, we got to do this before Christmas. We got to get things moving. We can't wait till the first of the year. We got to get moving. We got to at least get people the information so you understand today's conversation is the baseline, so that folks from the building industry, the real estate industry, understand what these two tools that are out there, the accelerator, and National Association of Realtors is putting some money behind implementation and assistance. So we like to get their money down here too. You know,
Who doesn't like
Well,
that?
we
Yeah.
well we did the study that was not cheap. So
yeah,
Yeah.
so we do have that research behind us, and we got that one piece, the data and analytics that you guys talked about in the playbook. So anyway, Sue, we're going to be doing a survey with the crowd who was on today and see if they want to get
okay,
involved. And probably some of them were down in Fayetteville, some were over in Winston, and so we'll break them up and send them to their local realtor association and let the realtor association work and try to get them involved in their local region, talking about housing. But I do know that uh, the Piedmont Triad Regional Council's putting on a housing summit in February, I think, end of February, February 27th. I think there are other parts of the area of the corridor that are doing housing summits as well, trying to move the envelope forward. So we're trying to do our part, and I think then I guess the next steps would be, I like simple and use the playbook seems is logical, and we could at least start there and start working with some of the information that you guys have provided and try to get a group of people. We already have interested parties in our area, Sue, and so we'll keep working on it. I guess we got to work on the government, the interested parties in the government side, and of course, the economic developers are very interested on this issue. So we do have some key players, and that would be very helpful.
I guess
And
one other thing I'd add there, and thanks for bringing that up, Mike, is like the target audience. Who is your target audience? That's another thing. We had it pretty easy. Like our target audience was the governor's transition team. We're getting a new governor in the fall. We like that was kind of our goal. Um, I think APA and NLC's, target audience was pretty obvious. They were kind of setting the stage for everyone, planners kind of across the country. But I think, for you, that would be a good one. Who do you want to get this information to? Decision makers that are actually going to make a difference. And so that's a good thing to think about when you get started too.
yeah, and of course, trying to convince the local politicians that they are in the housing industry, business, excuse me, whether they like it or not, because they're bringing all these jobs here and giving all the incentives, and
mhm,
we have nowhere to house them, so we got to do something. So.
And in some cases, it might be, it might be worth reaching out to state legislators too. I mean, because that's where you can kind of play both sides a little bit. Like we're trying to do this so the state doesn't have to override, but the state legislators can be a supportive group because they just want to address the issue. They don't necessarily want to create a big political fight, but they're responding to their constituents, and it'd be better to do it in a more effective way. So.
Sean, I got one quick question for you. What were
Sure.
the most significant challenges encountered during the development of the Delaware Housing Accelerator?
I mean, I think narrowing down like who we wanted to meet with, it was really kind of like time and scheduling meetings and identifying who made sense to meet with, because we realized we couldn't meet with everyone. And we this was all volunteer time, and we're just APA Delaware Executive Committee kind of taking the lead on this, and City Managers Association. This isn't on our paid time. So we had to kind of manage our time effectively that way. So trying to come up with a process that made sense in terms of time and effort, and who we were going to get effective feedback from. I think that was probably the trickiest thing to figure out. But we were very fortunate in that everybody we reached out to was happy to meet. A lot of what everyone said kind of aligned. A lot of people were saying similar things, so it just kind of came together, which may not always be the case.
mm,
But I think just making the effort and seeing where you can get with it is definitely worthwhile, because one of the things when we decided to do this is that just recognize that more about this issue than most people. Know more about this issue than the elected officials as realtors or planners. Like we understand this a lot better than most people, and it's something that everybody's really struggling with. So what's the harm in offering our ideas? Like if this is something that you want to do, we don't want to create some kind of big political fight between the state and locals and court battles and all that. We'd rather identify things that could just work and everybody work together, right? But they don't know where to start. We do. So that's where we felt like we could come in and be helpful to people. And so and that's all it really was. But the real struggle, I think, was, like, how are we going to do all this in the time we have, essentially? And how do we effectively schedule meetings, manage time? Our state housing authority, I mentioned we met with them in July. We were trying to meet with them in May or June, and we couldn't get it scheduled. And so we eventually got it in July, and we kind of moved up the realtors and home builders, moved up with them in June. So I think like that, really that part of it was the hardest. And it sounds goofy, but a lot of those logistics were kind of the hardest part of it. The meetings went like really well. We took notes, then we summarized the notes at the end. I mean, that was difficult, but we really did not want it to be a huge report. So we, narrowed down what we heard to a, pretty easily readable, understandable level. And, just described what we did and then had that matrix of recommendations. And that was it. We just try to keep it simple. So I think, lesson learned is try to keep it simple.
Simple is good. Simple is good. Well, listen, everybody, thank you for participating today. Sue, Jason, and Sean, Marvette, and Peter, we appreciate you, and a lot of good information. I think we're going to work towards getting a group together and see where that heads us. But the blueprint that you guys have laid out is going to be very helpful. We thank you.
Thanks for reaching out
Thank you.
for us. And
Thank you.
Jason and Sean, thanks for carving out part of your day. This is awesome.
Thanks.
Of course,
you.
no, thank you. Thanks for the invite. I really appreciate it. And best of luck. I really hope.
Yep.
I'll track and see what's going on. Hopefully you guys have a lot of success.
Thanks. Have a great day, you guys.
Bye-bye.